Late June, 1926, on the shore of Lac Saint-Jean. A farmer walks out to his meadow, and his meadow is gone. In its place, water. The next day, the water takes the oat field. Then the road. No rain, no spring breakup. The lake is rising on its own, 1 foot at a time. Nobody warned him. Nobody signed anything. And miles away, someone knows exactly why.
Pastures, meadows, seeded fields and woodlots were overrun by the destroying flood. The rivers were overflowing everywhere. Thus did the company install itself, without permission and without notice, on lands it had neither acquired nor asked for.
The company. What company? The one that has just finished building, at the outlet of the lake, the largest power plant in the world. The Premier of Quebec himself will say it, word for word, the company acted illegally, without right, in the most illegal way possible. And yet nobody will give the land back. Nobody will be punished. To understand, you have to go back 56 years. To a time when it was not water devouring this country. It was fire. In Chapter 1, 21 settlers from La Malbaie opened this country, and one man picked it up. Here is what happened next, how the sons of the country took the Saguenay back from William Price. How they built a kingdom of paper with other people's money. And how it became paper, the river became electricity, and the country changed hands a second time. (1852), Peter McLeod is dead, and everything he built belongs to William Price. In Chicoutimi, you work for Price, you buy at Price's store, you live on land that Price tolerates. You never even see money, the company pays in coupons, the pitons, the grimaces house money worth whatever the company decides. One traveler sums it up, the settlers have no market but the camps of Messrs. Price.
The workers were on the whole very poor, earning little, $8 to $10 a month in the winter camps, 50 cents a day at the mill in summer, for a 12-hour day. They were all very badly housed.
But the empire is rotting at the root. As early as 1860, David Edward Price admits it before the Assembly, there is enough good pine left, he hopes, to keep the market going for another 2 years. On March 14, 1867, old William dies at Wolfsfield, his estate near Quebec City. When his son William Evan dies in his turn, in 1880, the country does a strange thing, it passes the hat. A public subscription, a committee of notables on an idea from the Price's local agent. On June 24, 1882, on the banks of the Saguenay, a 50-foot obelisk is unveiled. On the marble, the son's name. And the father of the Saguenay. A monument paid for by the governed in a country whose wealth has already been cut down. And the first inhabitants? In 1851, the Montagnais of Lac Saint-Jean sign a formal protest. These lands have been their property from time immemorial. The answer comes 5 years later, a reserve, at Point Bluey, near Roberval. The country never ceded and never purchased now fits inside a square of land at the edge of the lake. Remember that lake. Everything will end there. Spring, 1870. It is hot, too early. With the seed in the ground, all around the lake, the settlers are burning their clearing piles, as they do every spring. On May 18th, near St. Felicien, a west wind comes up. By dawn on the 19th, the fire belongs to no one. In less than half an hour, the whole west side of Lac Saint-Jean is in flames. 5 hours later, the blaze is at Grande Décharge, 100 miles away.
The air is full of the cries and lamentations of the victims, and of the bellowing of animals perishing, swallowed in the burning flood. Only the frantic mothers try to pierce the black wall of smoke, running after children whose cries they can no longer hear. People search for one another, call out to one another, but in vain.
The toll, 555 families who lost everything. 7 dead. $500,000, including 28,000 logs belonging to the Price Company. And a mystery that became a legend, Chicoutimi, encircled, is spared. Witnesses would swear that the fire stopped where Father Racine had passed, the parish priest, cross held high, and at his side, a rare sight indeed, a priest come to ask for the protection of a Catholic priest. Saint Jerome is reborn within a year. The forest is not a country already short of pine has just burned part of it. 25 years later, a traveler would still describe, through a train window, the great dead trees, impassive as rows of skeletons. A train? Yes, the country has found itself a way out. First by water. In 1874, a regular steamer line finally links Quebec City to Chicoutimi. For the first time, a farmer can sell his ox somewhere other than the company store. In 1877, 2,000 head of cattle go down the fjord. Barter dies, real money enters the country. And with the steamers come the tourists of the far-famed Saguenay. Then by rail. People had been talking about a Lac Saint-Jean railway since 1854. One member of the legislature settles the debate. Opening townships to the settler is a national undertaking. On December 10, 1888, the locomotive steams into Roberval. At the end of the wharf, an American promoter builds a 300-room hotel. Next to it, a sawmill that does not belong to Price. For the first time in 50 years, the monopoly has competition. And while the country opens up, the old lion falls. 1891, Price closes its lower Saguenay camps. 1894, the family tries to sell Chicoutimi, nobody wants it. 1899, bankruptcy, reorganization. The house that owned the Saguenay for 60 years is on its knees. A new country weighs out of it, a weakened master. All that is missing is two men young enough to believe this is the moment. October, 1892. A 21-year-old bank clerk steps off the boat in Chicoutimi to run a brand new branch. His name is Julien Edouard Alfred Dubuc. He almost turned the posting down, too far, too small. There he meets the son of the second largest fortune in town, Joseph Dominique Guay, journalist, founder of the Progrès du Saguenay. Guay has a newspaper, a fortune, and one fixed idea. In his very first issue, in 1887, he writes it, "This country holds water powers beyond compare." 1895, Guay becomes mayor at 28. In 6 months, he and his friends found an electricity company, wrest from the government the rights to the Chicoutimi River, despite the opposition of the Price Company, and at midnight mass, Christmas 1895, the cathedral lights up with electricity. In the country of candles and company tokens, it is a sensation. And a declaration of war. The next step, a mill. Guay writes to Toronto, New York, Liverpool, everyone begs off. So they will build it themselves. On November 26, 1896, his newspaper announces it and performs the christening. A new era is opening for our town. In December, the Compagnie de Pulp de Chicoutimi is founded in the newspaper's own offices. Starting capital, French-Canadian savings, not $1 from anywhere else. Remember that. The site, an island with its waterfall, bought from the government for $20. The land around it? Bought, through intermediaries, from an agent of Price. Legend has it that Guay claimed he wanted to raise rabbits there. This time, it is Price who was taken in by a frontman.
It meant condemning ourselves to scrape by forever, as we had always scraped by in the past, under the paternal eye of Messrs. Price, who drew the millions out of the Saguenay, and left us nothing but the pitons.
On January 4, 1898, the St. Joseph Mill starts up. 75 workers. 5,000 tons in the first year, all of it sold in advance, in England. Dubuc leaves the bank and takes charge. 2 years later, at the Paris World's Fair, Chicoutimi Pulp wins a gold medal. The message has landed, the piton carriers have become industrialists. And then everything accelerates. 1903, a second mill, the largest mill ever built in North America. 1910, the first maker of mechanical pulp in Canada. Production climbs from 5,000 to nearly 100,000 tons. Chicoutimi quadruples, 2,200 people in 1891, 10,000 in 1925. The empire spills off the island. In 1909, Dubuc buys a bankrupt pulp mill at the foot of a 230-foot waterfall, Val-Jalbert. A model village, 80 houses, electricity, running water, telephones. On Bay, a chemical pulp plant gives birth to an entire town, which is named Port-Alfred, as in Julian Edward Alfred. In 1915, American financiers put him at the head of a trust with assets of nearly $30 million. The newspapers have his nickname, the King of Pulp. Who is this man? A devout Catholic, decorated by the Pope, who halts all production on Sundays. A boss who confides to his friend the priest, "I do not work for money." For the press, he is proof that a French Canadian can beat the English at big industry. But those who know him take note of his method. He builds in order to borrow. Each mill is pledged for the next one. Remember that too, in this kingdom, the real question is never the pulp. It is the money. But a kingdom must be paid for. At the foot of the mills, the Bassin district becomes a town within the town, 700 people in 1899, more than 4,030 years later. The company sells its workers houses with unfinished interiors, withholds part of their wages to build the church, sets up the credit union inside its own offices. From the school to the cemetery, everything goes through the company.
I started at the pulp mill in 1918. Since I was 13 and big and tall for my age, they put me on the machines. Sometimes the pay ran a few weeks late. But I never lost a cent at the pulpery.
In 1907, a first, the pulp workers found, with Father Eugene Lapointe, the first Catholic union in the country, and Dubuc is the first employer to recognize it. A fine story, not the whole story. Wages in Chicoutimi are lower than elsewhere in the province. Paydays run weeks late, a system, historians would call it. In May 1918, Lapointe writes to Dubuc, "Your workers have the unfortunate impression of being a weakness exploited by a force." In August, the kettle blows, a wildcat strike, without the union, without a strike fund. The strikers cut, the power industry is paralyzed for a whole day. The settlement, plus 20% below $3 a day, 15 above. And the strike ends, with a sermon.
You go on strike, he says, without securing any support. The strike, who can tell you it will not last 8 days, a month? And you have no strike fund to sustain you, no organization to back your demands.
Stop the film at the summit. December 31, 1917, the most prosperous year ever, 87,000 tons, a record. Now open the audited balance sheet. Total assets, $11,700,000. Cash on hand, $21,833. A giant living week to week. Equity frozen, $3,650,000 in shares, not $1 more from 1914 to 1917. The preferred shares, the ones meant for the big investors? Never placed. Everything else, debt. Some years, the interest exceeds the profits. And since 1915, the Boston Trust holds 9 shares out of 10, the founders are minority holders in their own house. Is he squandering the money? No, from 1914 to 1917, not 1 cent in dividends. The real problem comes before him, the pool. French-Canadian savings are too shallow, and the capital market is fragmented along the language line. The historian Ronald Rudin, French-Canadian firms were limited not by a lack of business sense, but by their difficulties in gaining access to a larger capital market. Look at price. As early as 1912, the Bank of Montreal places $6 million of his bonds. By 1920, his capitalization reaches $60 million. Dubuc did reach London. His 1913 bonds are payable in Montreal and in London, but through his English customers, not through the great brokerage houses. His bank is the Banque Nationale. His Quebec City office sits in the bank's own building. Remember that address. From that shortage flows the great strategic sin: the company will never make paper. Not out of blindness, Dubuc wants newsprint as early as 1914. Everything fails. A paper machine costs millions he does not have, and his lenders are his customers, pulp merchants, who demand pulp. The historian puts it bluntly: Dubuc is a prisoner of his financial backers. The first one is named Becker, a London merchant, his main outlet, founder of his Port-Alfred subsidiary. At the end of 1917, the trust that was supposed to carry him into paper even sells its only paper mill, in Brooklyn, to the New York Times. The cruelest part? The demand was there. The company itself wrote it in 1915, in its own annual report.
Were your company in position to accept them, 10-year contracts could be made for twice its present production at advanced prices.
$1920, the best year in the company's history. A ton of pulp sells for $68. Then the world closes in, the war is over, Scandinavia is back, the whole industry has overbuilt. By 1932, half of Canada's producers will be bankrupt. Dubuc was no more reckless than the others, only the only one with no bank standing behind him. 1922, the ton is worth $29.90. And the calendar turns cruel. July the 1st, 1922, the company's very first bonds fall due. July the 8th, fire breaks out at Port-Alfred, 28,000 tons of pulp burned. The claim, over $1 million. 32 insurers contested, the case goes to arbitration. To hold on, the company issues nearly $3 million in bonds in 1922, secured on everything it owns, and guaranteed by its 10-year contract with Becker. Count the ropes. Becker is its outlet. Becker founded Port-Alfred. Becker now guarantees its debt. 3 ropes, one and the same nail. And who takes up half the issue? Price Brothers. The adversary of always. 26 years after the Rabbit Island, Price sits down on the board of the company born to defeat it. The millions and the pitons, the old account reopens. Power slips away quietly at first. On May 1, 1923, 3 lines in the financial press: at K. Kendall, chief mechanical engineer of the Canadian Pacific, becomes manager of the pulp company and of its subsidiaries. Management changed hands a month before Dubuc signed anything at all. In June, he resigns, health reasons. His own newspaper, now in the company's orbit, does not breathe a word of it. At the end of 1923, Becker goes bankrupt in London. The outlet, the partner, the guarantor, all 3 ropes snap at once. March 6, 1924. In Montreal, a bankruptcy petition is filed against the pulp company, that is Lou Devoir's version. La Presse, the next day, headlines instead: voluntary liquidation. A bankruptcy suffered, or a liquidation chosen? We will not settle it. One detail leaves no room for doubt: among the liquidators named on the very first day is D.E.B. Brody, of Price and Company. Senator Beat can issue his denial: no official offer, Price's man is already inside. At the end of the chain of takeovers, the remains of the empire will end up with Price and its allies. The millions and the pitons, the account is settled, to the profit of the same name as in 1852. A historian would write, it was the end of the beautiful French-Canadian dream. Why did nobody come? In 1900, Price Brothers had brushed against bankruptcy. Its great creditor, the Bank of Montreal, put a man on the board and set the house right. Dubuc's bank was the Banque Nationale, the bank that trained him, that financed the first $50,000, the bank whose building housed his own office. And while the pulp company is collapsing, the Banque Nationale is collapsing too. its capital swallowed by a farm machinery factory in Montmagny. It is saved by a merger, the Banque Canadienne Nationale, early 1924, propped up by $15 million in bonds voted by the Taschereau government. 2 months before the pulp company's balance sheet. When the Chicoutimi Pulp went down, the French-Canadians' lender of last resort no longer existed. It had just been rescued itself. 7 months later. On October 2, 1924, Sir William Price, the third of the name, is inspecting rain damage in his timber yard at Kenogami. The sand cliff gives way. That same evening, Le Soleil, Sir William Price and 2 other companions were buried under a landslide this morning. He is found 8 days later, at St. Fulgence, 15 miles downstream. Lady Price has him buried as close as possible to the place of the accident. In Chapter 1, a Price refused to have anything to do with McLeod's coffin. Half a century later, the soil of the Saguenay closes the account. In 18 months, Dubuc brought down, Price buried, and Guay dies the following year. Meanwhile, on the Grande Décharge, someone is finishing pouring concrete. Let us go back 10 years. 1912, James Buchanan Duke, the Tobacco King, visits the Saguenay. In the rapids of the Grande Décharge, he sees the biggest dynamo on the continent. He buys the rights to the river. December 1922, late one evening, Quebec signs over the masterpiece, the right to raise Lac Saint-Jean by 17.5 feet, with one prudent clause: wait 2 years after the works. By the time the concession is signed, construction has already begun. The construction site is a monster, 2,000 workers, 12 turbines, the largest power plant in the world when it starts up. Then everything races ahead. July 1925, Duke reaches an understanding with the American aluminum giant, Alcoa. 6 days later, Quebec repeals the 2-year clause. Duke dies in October. And in the spring of 1926, Alcoa buys everything, the plant, the river, the lake, for $37 million. All that remains is to close the gates. On June 24, 1926, the gates close. There is the water from the beginning of the film. The lake rises 8 feet above its summer level. 851 lots flooded, 400 owners. At St. Method, 2/3 of the parish. At Point Talon, a herd of cattle stranded on an islet of mud. Point Bluey, too, has water at its door. No notice, no expropriation, permission will be requested only in August, in the official gazette, 4 dams, already built. And the newspapers? Nothing. Not one headline, in Chicoutimi or in Quebec City. The only Isle Maligny in the progress that summer, a cement advertisement. The water rises in silence, in every sense of the word.
You took my property without my permission, and you keep it against my will. Supported by all these facts, I protest, and I am ready to defend these claims against anyone.
Who will pay? December 6, 1926, Taschereau returns from Europe and, on the very same day, speaks both languages at once. The Soleil version: we do not want a single farmer of this province to be despoiled. The Devoir version: our opponents call this the tragedy of Lac Saint-Jean. It is a tragedy for them, but not for us. A company spending $100 million, $15,000 a day in wages, that is his answer to the drowned farms. On January 13, 1927, in the House, the admission from the start of the film, word for word: the company illegally, without right, in the most illegal way possible, flooded their lands before having acquired them. And he adds, it did wrong, and it knows it. The answer is called Bill 29, the Mercier Bill, after the Minister of Lands and Forests. On March 25, the opposition moves to strike out the 2 articles inserted exclusively in the interest of the company. Defeated, 14-29. Among the 29, Émile Moreau, the member for Lac Saint-Jean, the man whose letters, read in the House 10 days earlier, said, "It is a volcano that has erupted." He votes with the government. On April the 1st, the law receives assent. It does not return the land, it names a commission. Its award final and without appeal. The farmers claim $12 million. About $110,000 would be paid out, the price of the lost harvest of 1926. The commission would never publish a report, people are still looking for it. One-Syme Tremblay, the president of the Defense Committee, would go all the way to the Privy Council in London and end up ruined, his farm sold at auction. In the elections of May 1927, Taschereau sweeps 75 seats out of 85. The tragedy of Lac Saint-Jean cost nobody any power except those who lost their land. What follows fits in 3 years. 1927, the Ste. Marie Mills No. 2 and 4 in Chicoutimi closes first, 225 layoffs. Then Val-Jalbert, the announcement on August 5th, the official closure on the 13th, the model village empties out. 1930, at last. The local paper announces it 2 weeks in advance, on page 8, the Quebec Pulp closes its mill on October 31st. A notice, not a headline. On October 31st, the mill stopped for good, the machinery will be sold for the price of scrap iron. 1935, in the city of the King of Pulp, 8,172 people are on relief, tuberculosis reigns in the Bassin. Thomas Louis Tremblay, the boy from the machines, would say on his way out, cutting the stump that always hurts. And while Chicoutimi goes dark, 12 miles away, a city springs up in an open field. 270 houses in 135 days. It bears the name of Alcoa's president, AR-60A Arthur Vining Davis. In 1900, foreign capital in Canada was 85% British. By 1930, it has grown sixfold and it is 2/3 American. In one figure, the country changes hands a second time. Taschereau, for his part, owns it. I would rather import American dollars than export Canadians to the United States. Dubuc, for his part, does not leave. A member of parliament, then mayor of his city in the depths of the Depression, he finds work for whomever he can. He dies on October 27, 1947, at La Terrière, at Portage de Roches, beside the river where it all began. The dream of a great French-Canadian industry lasted 28 years. In the next chapter, the Americans' Lightning City, the metal that will win a world war, and the men of the Saguenay who, in the pot rooms of Arvida, start over from nothing. In a country that, for the third time, is no longer theirs.